All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome. This is our first keynote session for our Among Us campaign, where we are talking with Beth and Buck Webb, and we're talking about parenting in general tonight. So, the way it's going to go, I'm going to ask a bunch of general questions, and then we'll hear from Beth and Buck about however they want to answer those. And then we will, at the end, kind of wrap it up with a few questions from a few people that we have joining us on the call as well. So, in all of the announcements and times that I've talked about this campaign and the conference that we're entering into right now, I haven't really made the connection between our campaign topic of Among Us, where we've been talking about the incarnational living and talking about Romans 12 through 16 to parenting and marriage. Haven't made that connection. So I think the connection is kind of obvious, right? It's about the church and life together and how we interact with the community around us. And so we want to kind of zoom in on some of those smallest relationships, the little microcosms of the church, which are our homes. So we're going to talk parenting tonight, and we're going to talk marriage on Thursday. Thanks for joining us. And really quick, I know I look like a total DJ right now. Like I'm just way too prepared for this. So hopefully it sounds good. I was trying really hard to find some headphones that weren't massive, but this was all I got. So here we are. So first, Beth and Buck Webb, we've glad to have you. Thanks for joining us. Why don't you just start by telling us a little bit about your family?
Yep. So do you want to do the family stuff or you want me to? We should discuss this.
Yeah, I'll do it. So let's see. We've been married almost 16 years. Next month will be 16 years. So we celebrated our 15th anniversary at the beginning of COVID with a car date. We thought that would be like one car date. It turned into like 42 car dates we've had in the last, year. That's good. We have 4 kids who are 12, 11, 9, and 8. And then we are finishing up our adoption with 2 boys who are 7. So we're kind of in the, middle years of parenting, I guess.
Yep.
And our disclaimer is, come back in 10 years and let us know, we'll tell you how we actually did.
Yeah.
So, right, this is what we're doing. And we hope we can share that with you guys tonight. But.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, you guys have a lot of experience as well in family ministry. So I think, Buck, you told me you guys have been in family ministry in various forms for how long?
20 plus years.
Okay.
So, we've been married 16. So then I've done student ministry and then family ministry with kids, birth through high school for the last decade or so. And yeah, we've done that in churches from coast to coast, basically.
Yeah. So what did some of those positions entail?
Yeah. So I was a student. So we met in Seattle, where I was a student ministry strategist for a local group of churches there. And then I was a family pastor in Wisconsin, a family pastor in West Virginia, a student pastor in Tennessee, and then here in Iowa as well. So yeah, we've traveled around a little bit, but yeah, a lot of that, most of that, the last 10 years specifically, has been overseeing the ministries from birth through high school and helping partner with parents through the local church. So
awesome. Well, yeah, we'll come to that one later, but why don't we speak to that? Let's talk about it now. Let's go there now. How do you guys view the relationship between the church and the home in terms of spiritual formation and discipleship of children?
Yeah. So I would say really kind of at the core, it's really about relationships. And so the phrase that we use a lot and is this idea of we want to give you a person, not just a program. And so our goal for churches, the churches we've served in, has really been to see how can we connect kids with a second voice in their life. So we do that through small group leaders, those kind of things. But because we really do see that as having somebody else in your kid's life that doesn't have to tell them to go to bed and eat vegetables and all that kind of stuff. But that's pouring into them that, some of those same values that you would have, helping them communicate biblical truths into their lives, helping them to understand what it means to follow Jesus in a different way, gives them a lot of value. And so from a church perspective, it's about how can we set up systems to initiate that and help that go forward. From a parent perspective, it's like, hey, you're just looking for people like, hey, who do I want my kids to be like, and how can I help them? How can I get those voices into my kid's life?
Yeah, I would say a term we use is widen the circle. So, right, find other people. So sometimes it might be their small group leader. Sometimes it might be someone else that I feel like has similar interests as my kid or seems to notice the quirkiness of my kid and they're okay with that. And so I might ask them, hey, can you hang with my kid for a day? I just want you to love on them and ask them questions and, tell them about something in your spiritual journey, what God's doing in your life or what he did in your life when he was, when you were that age. Just that idea of constantly looking for people that can pour into my kids. Because, if you're a parent, when they come home from the first day of school and they're like, well, Mrs. Saban said, and I'm like, I know, I've been telling you that for 5 years. But now that Mrs. Saban said it, right, it's like this holy moment for your children. So if we can do that within the church, I think that's really powerful.
Yeah. And I would add to that too. Don't feel like you have to make that ask for, I don't know, the church. When I grew up in church, it was like, oh, will you disciple me? And it's like this 10-year commitment and, you're going to be this Yoda for me for forever, and if you can think of it as like, hey, is there moments? Hey, would you have an afternoon? That's just a much more for the person that's doing that. It's a much more doable ask. And B, it allows for some of that, like, hey, did that click or not? Those things to go on.
I would also say too, with the church, just finding a way to encourage parents to be that primary person who's passing on their faith and what that looks like. I mean, we see that all through scripture, right? If that's the parent's primary job. And I think the church is designed to come alongside parents, but not to do it for parents. I grew up in the generation where even lots of good Christian parents outsourced the spiritual development of their kids to the church. And I think this next generation is saying, hey, wait, isn't that our responsibility as parents? And so I think the church finding ways to resource parents and encourage parents, because I look around all the time and I see parents doing it, right? I see parents reading their Bible and then talking to their kids about what they read. We don't have to overcomplicate it. We're just supposed to talk about our faith all the time with our kids. And I see parents doing that. And so the church, I think, just needs to encourage them and tell them to not give up, even when it seems like their kids aren't listening or aren't growing, because that's how God intended it. And he will work that out in the end, I think.
Yeah, that's really good. Why don't we talk about that a little bit more? Because like discipling your kids at home can seem like a real intimidating process for a lot of parents. So what are some suggestions that you guys have for whether it's doing devotions at home, just having these spiritual conversations, leveraging teaching moments, whatever. Why don't you guys speak to that a little bit?
Well, so first get your 20 points of things you're going to do every day. No, I'm kidding.
It's a good thing it's not that way, because we would not do that well.
We would fail.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of things that for us, there's a lot of things for us that we've done in the past. I think as we were talking about this, one of the things I would tell parents is, hey, you will find things that work for a season and then it will fade. And that's okay. It's okay to say like, hey, we're going to have devotions every night at dinner, and that may last for a few months. And then it just doesn't work anymore. And so it's like, okay, so then you're just asking the question of like, okay, that's not working for us anymore. What's the next season look like? How are we accomplishing some of those things that we're trying to do? For us, I would say some things that, and again, every family's, so again, prefacing this whole thing of like, hey, every family's different. And so we'll share some things that work for our family that may not work for your family. You may not be wired the same way that we're wired. And so it's figuring out like, hey, what does that look like in our lives? And really just asking, I think the starting place is asking that question of like, hey, what am I seeing in my kids? What do I want to see in my kids? And what works with the rhythms of our families? And what does that look like? So I think for us, one of those is just trying to be intentional with our conversations at dinner. For us, dinner time, our kids are home 90% of the time for dinner. And so that's a pretty stable place. Again, other families that may not be the best time, breakfast or at bedtime may be best, figure out a time. But then it's leveraging the conversations for the season that we're in now. um, I'll let you talk about values in a second. But the season that we're in now, we're finding a lot of conversations based on things that are happening, in our world. I don't know if you've noticed it or not, but there's lots of things to talk about in our world. Whether it's from, so I say that everything from, politics to things going on in their school to whatever it is, we're trying to point them back to, hey, how do we think about these things through the lens that Jesus would have us to think about? Like, what does that look like, in the context of, what God says to us, and then trying to point that, bringing them back to scripture with that, helping them think through that and talk through that. And then for us, we point back to our family values a lot. Something we did when we were, again, all the stuff that we've done is because we've seen other parents that we watched their families, and we're like, that were usually a step or maybe two steps ahead of us. And we're like, man, we want our family to look like theirs, or we want our kids to look like theirs. And so we would just kind of, again,
ask them a lot of questions.
It would be one of those things. Hey, can we grab dinner? And then we would just pepper them with questions and talk and say, it wasn't this long, some of those formed into really great relationships that have lasted a long time. Some of those were kind of one-offs, and, but it's just trying to, hey, what are some things that you did? What does that look like in your family to help learn from that? One of the things we've done is values. I'll let you talk about our values.
Yeah, we had several friends before we were even married who kind of said, hey, we want to establish our family knowing what we value, what's important, kind of what our family is going to be about. And so they kind of said, like, hey, the earlier you can do that in your family, the better. So when we got married, we kind of sat down and kind of started hashing through what we wanted our family to be about. And then kind of, I would say when our kids hit 2, we just started talking about them all the time. Sometimes we had intentional moments like a Saturday morning breakfast, right? We pull a specific value and talk about it. So God's purpose or each other or generosity or whatever it was. And, when they're in preschool, we'd ask them preschool questions, how can you be generous, right? That question gets more in depth and harder the older they get. And the way we talk about them has changed. I was saying the other day, like, I think our 3 oldest, our girls, have a really good grasp of them. But, the youngest, we kind of just assumed like he knew what our family was about. And so maybe we've forgotten to tell him some of those things. So just kind of us saying, okay, we need to go back and rehash some of those things. We kind of let those direct a lot of the questions that we had of just saying, hey, when we're talking about things and one of these values can be pointed towards, let's pull it out in this moment. Let's remind our kids, the why and the how in this moment, how we can live that out. It was one of those things that I really wasn't sure, like if they were grabbing a hold of. And then, in their little ways, they just kind of let you. We asked them the other night, like, hey, what will you do when you grow up and your parents, it's the same that we do? And they were like, oh, we'll teach our kids to value other people. It was really good. Now we did ask them too, what things they would not do that we do. And that's a longer list, so I won't go through that. But, it's just good to hear them now that they're older start to be able to articulate some of those things that we were able to put in place when they were little. Yeah. I think going back to the conversation of like actually discipling your kids, there's a billion resources, right? You can just search any Christian website and find so many resources. And we've bought some that we've never used. And we tend to be kind of simple in the way we do stuff. So we'll just, start a good devotion and then not finish it. So I'm sure we've all done that. But I think we found for us the rhythms of like, hey, at Christmas, we're going to do a devotion, right? So we're going to set aside that time and do that. But like, we're not going to do that every day because that feels forced for us. But we are going to have conversations every day. So I think, whether it's teaching your kids the Bible, things like that, right? There's a ton of resources that we could go into, but I think what Buck said, finding the rhythms is what's most important.
Yeah, that's really good. While we're on that, what are a couple of your favorite resources? Is there like one or two that you're like, we've read this, we've watched this video, I don't know, and this was really impactful for us in our parenting.
Yep. So I would say Jesus Storybook Bible, easily my favorite resource for preschoolers. I still like it. I say that preschoolers, new believers, like it's just very well told, on the level that a preschooler is going to get a Bible story through that. What else would you?
I would say the book that was most influential to me was Parenting Beyond Your Capacity by Carrie Newhoff and Reggie Joyner. And it just kind of plays into some of these different themes of widening the circle and just kind of really leaning into intentional parenting, not letting parenting happen to you. And another resource that we've used a lot in our family, like with our kids, would be anything from Walk Through the Bible, which is kind of like an old school. I mean, they were out when I was kids, but memorizing scripture and learning the books of the Bible and what they mean and why they were written and all those things have been really helpful. And in a way that our kids were engaged. So it wasn't just us having to come up with really cool things about the books of the Bible.
Yeah.
So that's a big resource we've used.
Yep.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. We'll try to put some of the links for those in the notes so that you guys can pick them up. So when it comes to parenting, discipline is particularly a topic that tends to come up a lot, especially when it comes to like spiritual formation. Spiritual formation. So can you guys just talk for a minute about like how keeping the goal of discipline in mind, like how important that is, like what is the purpose of this? What are we trying to accomplish? And just, I don't know, give us, I don't want to try to trap you guys into like, do you do this? Do you not do that? That's not the point here. But like, what's the goal? What's the, what are some of the strategies or things that we can remember to employ to help us effectively discipline for discipleship?
Yeah, it's a great question. You want me to go? Okay.
Yeah, you can answer.
Yeah, so I would say to begin with, it's just always trying to say, hey, the goal of our parenting is to raise adults that love Jesus, and that hopefully, and that we'll have a relationship with when they go out of our house. Like that's kind of the goal now. So in that, if we're looking at how do we raise adults and not just change the behavior of our kids right now, then you're having conversations in the midst of that discipline that are pointing toward future things. So I'll give you an example. Our youngest is 8, and he's a boy, and so in that, he's just in that phase where there's just a lot of times where life's not fair to him, and so then because it's not fair to him, he reacts strongly to his siblings and those kind of things. And, and so the conversations I have with him is a lot. I'm using the words of, hey, listen, one day you will not be in our house, and I need you to value other people really well. That starts with your siblings and your family. That moves to other people as well. And so then we have the conversation about whatever issue it was at that time or whatever behavior that was. Again, I am not perfect at that. There are times when I raise my voice to higher levels than it should with my kids, and so so it's one of those things where like when I'm at my best, and we're not always at our best as parents because we get tired and we get frustrated. I'm in that mindset of like, okay, this is not about this moment. This is about who do I want you to become when you're going off to college, and how am I helping you to get there through this? And so that helps kind of me to kind of like reframe my space of, okay, like, let's not get upset, with, just this behavior. How does that translate down the road? So that's a big piece of it for us. I would say, I would say one of the things, even just as spouses, is trying to take those cues of like, hey, let me get this one. You seem a little, usually it's hey, I got this is kind of code for like, you're really mad right now. And so I think I might be calmer to be able to deal with this. And sometimes that, we take that cue, and sometimes like, no, I'm good. I got this. We need to deal with this. And so I think knowing those cues is helpful. And even as parents, one of the things, I think one of the advice that we've given to couples as they're doing premarital counseling is, hey, how did your parents discipline you? And having the conversation with your spouse, hey, what did that look like in your house? Because what you're going to find is whatever that looked like in your house, you're going to bring that to your kids in some way. And so being able to know that in advance will help you, because you, as parents, when you get in a conflict of like, I can't believe you did that with our kids. It's like, that's the way I was, grew up. Having those conversations when you guys both aren't upset, then it helps you understand your spouse of like, oh, this is why you respond this way because your dad did this or your mom did this, and sometimes it's, hey, like I remember we have some friends, I'll share this story because they're not here. But every time they would go to Walmart, they would go and ride, those, I don't know if they still have them, those dumb little like fire trucks and horses that you go and you put a quarter in. So when they had kids, every time they would go to Walmart, they would always let their kids ride the horses. And the reason is because the dad never got to ride the horses and it made him mad. And so he was like, one day when I have kids, they're going to get to ride the horses.
Every time.
And so every time they would go and ride the horses when they went to Walmart because he didn't get, now that's that's not, doesn't have a lot for discipline, but some of those things that we do as parents, are because, this is what worked, in my family or didn't work in my family. And so I'm going to respond to it because of that.
Yeah, I would say the other thing is we've tried all different kinds of discipline, timeouts and spanking. I mean, the list could go on and on of what we've tried. Right. Every kid is different. So every kid responds in a different way to, how they're going to view consequences. We have some of our children who have said, hey, can you tell me the consequence ahead of time? Because I'm thinking about doing this and I just need to know if it's going to be worth it. Right. And we have other kids who are like, if there is any consequence involved, I'm out. Like, it's never worth it.
True story.
So, you have to balance all of those things. But I think, and we talked about before, just going back to the idea of conversation, right? When we show our kids grace, we tell them, right? Hey, I'm showing you grace. Here's why we show grace, right? Because here's what God did for us. When there are consequences, a lot of times natural consequences. Hey, we talk about, how God watches out for us and how he keeps us on a straight path and all of those things. So we try to not just have those conversations internally, we try to have them with our kids too. Yeah. Which sometimes leads to really awkward moments because we're like explain to them why we're about to give them this really bad punishment. But then we can like blame it on God, like God set us up as your parents and we have to, help you make your life. So talk to him about it, right? This is what we feel like God's telling us to do. Not really, but there have been situations where it's like, why are you telling me this? But I think it's because long-term, I want them to know that there's a why. I would say the other thing for me is apologizing when that discipline is not godly, when it's not pointing them to God, to be able to come back to them and say, hey, I messed up because I was angry or I was hurt or you were a jerk or whatever. And when mom and dad do discipline you, I wanted to point you to Jesus. And I don't think that did. It didn't point me to Jesus. I don't think Jesus felt loved. So, I need to apologize. That way they don't get conflicting views on what we're trying to do in those moments.
Yeah.
It's good. It's a good transition point too, I think, to what you just were talking about having, balancing grace and mercy for your kids, but also giving yourself grace as well when you do make a mistake. So let's talk a little bit about just parenting in general. And I think you touched on it pretty well about how, we need to give ourselves, grace because we are going to fail. Is there anything more that you want to add to that piece before we kind of jump into the next one?
No, I mean, I think that's the number one thing is just that idea that, hey, you know what, you're not going to be perfect. Even if you got the best systems, you follow all the books, you do all the things, just resting in the fact that, God's ultimately God's watching out for your kids and he loves them more than you do even. And just knowing that, hey, you're not going to, working through the Holy Spirit, him allowing you to work through you, knowing that you're going to mess up. You're not going to mess your kids up so bad that God can't fix them.
I always I grew up with a single mom, 5 kids, and my mom still has this guilt, about the life that she gave us. And I've just always told her, hey, mom, you gave us the best thing because you taught us about Jesus. And he absolutely filled in the gaps. Like when you couldn't be there, when your discipline was out of line, when you weren't enough, God was there.
Yeah.
And so now I try to remind myself of what I told my mom, of just trusting him and resting in that, and being okay.
That's awesome. And that kind of leads me to that. When we're thinking about parenting our kids, how important is it for us to be just good disciples of Christ, like practicing the ways of Jesus, things like, prayer, repentance, remembering that stuff before. How important is that for us to parent our kids?
Yeah, I think I heard a quote today that I'm going to butcher, but it was,
I didn't hear it.
I know, but it was to the effect of, you'll never know how good of a father you were to your kids, until they're a father themselves, or until they're an adult. And it was this idea, and that's not the quote, but it's what it's the idea that, oh no, it's until you see yourself reflected in your kids. And and so I think about that. My wife, for example, I didn't think I was that much like my dad until I got married. And my wife just started pointing out all the ways that I was just like my dad. And not bad ways or anything, just like little things, different things. And in that, I think there's just so much of that that's true and it's so scary to me and humbling as a dad, and as a parent to know that, hey, your kids are going to reflect who you are. And so much of it is caught rather than taught. So much of it is who they see you are, like when it comes to your values, they know, what you value because of just the rhythms of your life and what you talk about and who you are. For me, so, there's things that we do that do help. There's those moments where we teach our kids, specific truths and things. But so much of it is those in between and in the cracks that they really do pick up on our spiritual lives. And so, so the best thing you can do for your kids is grow grow yourself and grow as a follower of Jesus yourself to see that reflected. I remember coming home as a teenager, and my mom, probably 85% of the time, I would be, I was a good kid, and so she would let me stay out late. And so I'd get home at 11:30 at night, and my mom would either be reading her Bible, she had a little lamp on next to on the couch, or she would be asleep with her Bible on the stand next to her. And I just remember that, I just have that picture in my head over and over again. Almost every time I came home. And again, she wasn't doing it to show off. It was just a time that, hey, I've got some time here. I'm going to set aside, we rarely even talked about what she was reading at that time, but that image was there. And so one of the things I've seen, and I would say I don't even do a good job of this, and I'll tell you what it is, but somebody else said, is having your Bible open in front of your kids in a regular place. And so whether that's at your kitchen table in the mornings, whether that's, that your kids see you in God's word, because that, we've been taught that, that has to be this private moment and this time alone with God. When it comes to discipleship, hey, do your kids know that you have this time? What are those habits that you're trying to develop in your kids? Are they developing in you? I think this, wasn't thinking about this, probably one of the most fun things that we've seen in the last year and a half or so is our kids our oldest was a small group leader at church for us. And so she's 12, she's a small group leader for preschoolers, and watching her just crush it. And so like COVID hits and she's leading like the Zoom calls and she's telling us, hey, I need to get on a Zoom call for my kiddos, and like things, not because we told her, hey, you have to be like this, but just because she was part of our kids ministry and like was like, hey, this is what we do, this is how we pour into others, and so it's one of those things is like, oh, we didn't even have to teach her that. She just caught it because she got drugged to church with us that kind of stuff. So I know I've talked a lot. I'll stop.
No, I would just say that caught not taught thing. Yeah, there's follow-up conversations, but I mean, I would say the same thing about being involved in community and small group, right? From the time our kids were little bitty, right? We go to small group. They love going to our small group, right? Because they create community and build that community. And then they've been in a small group since they were born. And so it's just this thing that it's just become a rhythm in their life. And so if we can model the rhythms and then they can watch those rhythms in us and how it affects us, then I think that that's a really powerful piece.
Good. So what are, let's go here. Give me like one or two of your favorite parenting tools. So whether it's like, I don't know, like the one-on-one time with each kid, or I don't know, some sort of strategy that you have. Like you already mentioned, like talking about your family values around the table. I think that's beautiful. Stuff like that. What are some of your favorite like parenting tools that you guys use often?
Okay, here's one that we've done from the beginning, and I didn't realize how powerful it was until my kids kept reminding me of them. But we have a lot of traditions. Like a lot, like way more than you should have, because they were just kind of like accidental. Like one day we did this, and so now every year on that day, your kid, because your kids don't forget anything. Like I mean, our kids were like 3 and 4, and they were like, "I really love how we always get this in our stocking," and I was like, "Oh, okay, write that down because I will forget that this is like a new tradition in our home." But the phrase we say is traditions provide something steady, valuable, and safe in a confusing world and give kids a place to belong. And looking back on my life growing up, my mom did that really well. And I think that's why, like, I never panicked about my life, even though it was absolute chaos to anybody looking in on the outside. And so I just kind of brought that into our family. But it's been something that I think our kids hold on to. They look forward to. It helps them know, like, hey, I'm a part of this family, right? This is my place.
And by traditions, this is like, hey, we cook homemade donuts once a year on the 4th of July. I don't know where that started, but it became a thing.
We cannot stop it.
And so the kids will talk about, oh, okay, cool. That's part of our tradition. We have things like we do Advent stuff at Christmas, where we take those 30 days leading up to Christmas to help kids focus on Jesus during that season and not just on those things. But like a lot of the traditions aren't even like these, we have certain foods at the Super Bowl every year, or, so they're not like these elaborate things necessarily. It's just like, oh yeah, we do this. And as one who did not grow up with tons of traditions, it's one of those things that I have had to love my family with. If you know what I'm saying by that. Like, it's not always a thing I'm like, oh yeah, like I'll roll my eyes a little bit, especially when they were little, and because you can get away with, they don't know any better. But now I just see the value of it, of just like, oh wow, like these are things that our kids will take and help them to go with them. Other tools.
I don't know. That's mine. What tools do you use?
Yeah, I would say dinner. The power of one of the things that I think the power of a car ride, especially the older they get, having a middle school daughter, the opportunities to take those 15, 20-minute car rides, you get to see more fruit from that than I do, because you pick up our kids every day. But so then, if I get an opportunity to just say, hey, I've got 20 minutes where I've got to go run this errand across town, and I can take, one of our daughters there, I get that, as they get older, those conversations, again, and they're not like, hey, now we're going to talk about what you feel about sexual purity. It's just like, hey, what's going on? How, and eventually something leads to, something like, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that was going on at school, or those kind of things. So.
Yeah, I would say just finding those little moments you can steal away. Hey, I've run into the store. Who wants to go with me? Or sometimes, hey, whoever goes to the store with me gets something, Sometimes they want to go, and sometimes you have to bribe them to go. But opportunities to steal a kid away, or wait, everybody else is going to be gone tonight. Great. What can we do with this one kid that's going to be really impactful? So yeah, I think those little moments would be something that's pretty big deal for us.
Yeah, I would say one other thing that I don't think we have been we've been pretty ruthless about keeping things really simple for our kids' schedules. And so they're not in a ton of activities outside of, and not that they don't do anything, but for us, it's just been a rhythm that we've just said, like, hey, it's going to be, it's a value for us that we're not over scheduling our kids. And so in that, I think that's a tool that we've used that, again, may not work for your family. You guys may have different interests. It helps for us. For a lot of our kids aren't super athletes or anything like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, keeping it simple means we get more of those moments, because they're fleeting and it goes faster and faster. So trying to make the most of them.
It's good. Beth, what give me like one or maybe two things that you often hear that moms tend to struggle with, and just speak into those a little bit.
Well, the first one I thought about was just this idea that I'm not enough. I haven't met a mom yet who has escaped that feeling at one point or another. And kind of what I talked about earlier of just being able to, one, rest in who God thinks I am. It's not an accident. These kids are my kids. When our second born was 2, I sat on the floor. I cannot tell you the number of times outside of our bedroom door and cried. I just told God, like, you made a mistake. This is wrong kid, wrong parent, right? Like, not a good match. I called my brother and was like, I think I got your kid, like, because she's doing things that you did. Like, this isn't working. It goes back to all the things we've talked about already, right? Spiritual disciplines, community, being around other moms who are going to cheer you on. Just having people that you can be real with, that you can call in those days. Before my kids were born, I had a mom friend who just said, hey, if it's like 3 a.m. and you're thinking about like putting your kid in the oven, like, just call me, and I was like, well, I would never do that, And now I'm like, oh man, I've had so many of those moments through the years. Not that specifically, it's never really fun. But, just those moments where you're just like, hey, I can't do this. And just knowing that, one, God can, and 2, he's put people around us who have strengths that we don't have different perspectives than we have wisdom, beyond us. And even if they don't have any of those things, they're going to show up. The other thing is, this is kind of more in this middle elementary to upper elementary middle school phase that I'm in now, is knowing that your kids will hear your discipline and your advice and your guidance as nagging. And just being okay with that, because ahead of time, I've decided that I'm parenting with the end in mind. And so who they are at 20 and 30 and 40 and what their relationship with Jesus looks like then is more important than if they're annoyed by me right now. So I can stick with it. It also means sometimes I'm like, hey, I need you to go tell our 12-year-old this, because I've already told her 17 times and she's just not hearing it. So, just being okay with that, because sometimes I'm like, I just want to be your friend, or I just want you to like me today. And so then I want to cave on what I know is right. And sometimes I do. Sometimes I do cave on what I know is right, because I'm like, oh, if I say that, you're going to cry because you're hormonal and it's driving us nuts. But, on my best days, when I'm doing it right, I'm just being able to say, no, this is okay. She still needs to hear this. She still needs to obey in this way or do this in this way. Because down the road is more important than this moment right now.
Good. Thanks, Beth. Buck, one or two things that dads tend to struggle with.
Yeah, I would say, again, a lot of it's, I'll speak out from me, is one, and I see this some in a lot of dads too, is just the idea of engagement. That for dads, we know that our wives are, especially when our kids are little and babies, it's like, oh, well, you've got that. Like, like you can feed them on your own. You can do all these things. And like, I'm just like, I don't know. I'm just kind of like, hey, I'll bring home the bacon or whatever. And so in that, we can kind of get in this mode of just like deferring to our wives. Just, hey, what should we do with the kids? What does that look like? Okay, yeah, whatever you said, that's great. And I would say the power of engagement in a dad's life, though, if you've had it's just study after study, and just from your own lives, how powerful it is when kids have a dad that not just there in the house, but also that's engaged. And so in that, I would just say, hey, even if you don't know what to say, and this is the thing I tell myself this, hey, even if you don't know what to say, just show up and be present, put your phone away, and just play that game or watch that stupid show that you can't stand. But your kids love, or watch that YouTube video of some other kid playing a game somewhere else that they love, but you don't get, and in that, ask questions, get into there. I think for me, I have a tendency to downplay my kids' reality because I know, like, and again, I was a youth pastor. I was, and so I know, like, I'm seeing, hey, when you're 20, this isn't going to matter at all. You're literally not going to care that she stole the last chip out of the bag that you said was yours. You're not going to care that she cheated at Monopoly. But right now it's a big deal to them. And so, the more that, and my encouragement, again, I say this to myself as much as I do to other dads, the more you can step into that and to say, hey, I'm going to set my world aside and make your world important. I think kids begin to see that. The second thing I would say is, how are you going after your kid's heart? There's the day-to-day part of that, and there's the intentional part of that. But whether it's in those moments of discipline, whether it's in those moments of pain or hurt, or it's just the regular stuff that's going on, I find myself, with my daughters, forcing myself to say, like, okay, she cares about this, so I need to at least pretend I care. Like I need to get engaged with her world because I want her to know that I value her, or I want him to know that I care about him. And so how can I show that to them in those, oftentimes it's not, we think as guys, or maybe as parents in general, we think in the big moments, we think about, like, at Christmas time, we think about, hey, do we have those big rocks in there? A lot of times kids feel valued and loved over time in the little moments. And so I would just say, hey, how are you engaging with those? What does that look like?
It's really great. Thanks, guys. That's all the questions that I have. So you guys that are on the call with us and have been listening, do you guys have any questions for Beth and Buck? Someone be brave and go ahead and go first.
I'll start with a question.
Thank you guys
for all that you've been sharing with us so far tonight. We really appreciate it. My wife Trisha and I here, as Trisha was putting down our daughter, our 2-year-old Camila earlier, that's just the day. It's, it happens when it's ready to happen, and sometimes you get on a call late. One question I would have is, I think that we're definitely in a season or a phase where we're really starting to recognize when Camila's learning from us, like where she can, like, there may be a snapback of a conversation between Trisha and I, and then I'll look and see Camila and she's like, what are you guys doing right now? Like, why aren't you guys both happy right now, or whatever it may be? Do you guys have just a quick tip of, like, how you as parents get through this phase of not phase, like, but teach, like, retrain yourself to make sure that those conversations aren't happening and being caught by your kids?
That's a good question.
Yeah. So I would say, I mean, part of that is just the first step is just knowing that, like, hey, and again, whether they catch it when they're teenagers, as much as they do when they're 2. So it doesn't, like, go away. I would say typically, so it's going to happen to everybody. You're going to be in the car, you're going to be in the kitchen, you don't think anybody's paying attention, and the conversation gets a little more heated than you want it to, those kind of things. I think if you catch yourself in a spot and anytime you can apologize to anybody else, I think what you said earlier, man, do that as much as you can, even to the point where you're like, this is kind of silly, but let me go ahead and just say, hey, I'm sorry. I was a little sharp in my words there. I was a little, quick with that. And then B, just have that, I think talking about it ahead of time. I know when the kids were little, it would be like, hey, we're going to need to go in the bedroom and close the door and talk about this. And sometimes that meant, we put on the babysitter at Netflix or something and went and hashed something out. A lot of times it was, with littles in the house, you can wait till they go to bed and say like, hey, let's talk about this later. I don't know what tips you would have.
I was just going to say, like, it's okay if they see it sometimes, because then you get to teach your kids about marriage and God's grace and God's plan for that. You get to, I don't want our kids to grow up and get married and be like, well, my parents had like this perfect marriage, right? And I have to like be perfect like them. But no, like, hey, my parents fought. There was some tension sometimes. They didn't always agree, but they loved each other. They kept showing up. And right, like, once again, same thing we've said all night, they let God fill in those gaps, right? Like, they didn't run away because their two sinners married to each other and it just wasn't going to work. So yes, while I do think you should try to find ways to move that conversation somewhere else, I think it's okay.
Yeah.
I've even found myself, like, probably when our kids were like 4 and 5, so a little bit older, but they're starting to pick up on that tension a little bit, of just saying, I am so glad that you guys have a dad who loves mom enough to talk to me about the things that are hard or that he's struggling with, or right, a bad choice that mom made, or right, that dad loves me enough and loves us enough that we're going to have those talks. And sometimes they get a little heated, but we love each other and we're not going anywhere and all those things. So it gave us a chance, even when they were little, to reinforce our marriage, reinforce the choices that we had made. So don't panic is what I'm saying when they see you in those moments, because I think they can be really good opportunities too.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question at all?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, and I like that you pointed out that, like, you're not perfect, and that's a perfect example to say, like, because I feel like there are those kids out there that they never witnessed their parents fighting or disagreeing or anything like that. And what's that? Oh, I thought there was like a bug or something. I'm a little tired. So my question would be a little bit more directed towards you, Beth. So you mentioned a little bit about the balance between like friend and parent, and I can already tell, like, Camila's not even 2, and I'm like, this is a struggle. So do you have any tips, a little sort of off topic of this conversation, but do you have any tips for me on that?
I would just say, try not to be surprised very often. Because if you know it's coming, then you can plan a little bit ahead of time. And I know you can't know exactly every conversation, but like, hey, I know my kids are going to try to get away with things. I know my kids are going to hide things from me. I know my kids are going to lie. I know my kids are going to cheat. I know my kids are going to steal something, right? I know they're going to do these things. So then when they happen, I have a plan of attack. Or I've already talked with other parents about how they respond in those moments. And I know that like their kids are turning out okay. So I don't have to feel that pressure to cave in the moment. And I think another thing I would say that's kind of like the counter to that is plan intentional fun with your kids, right? Fun over time convinces our kids that we actually like them. And so we need to have fun with them, plan fun. That way, it's not just those moments, right? It's not just the moments where we're choosing their long-term, betterment over something that they see as good or fun or happy, but we're choosing to plan things that they're like, oh yeah, my mom does have fun with me. She does care about me. She does like me. So this must be like a thing that she really cares about too, or she wouldn't be acting in that way. So that would be my suggestion.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Any other questions? Jamie?
Yeah, so I think it's so important to have our kids like having those rhythms, but then also like helping them see the bigger story. So like you talked about like the traditions or doing things with them, or your daughter like serving in your kids ministry and then experiencing that and then taking ownership of that. How have you as a family, with everything that's going on in the world right now, maybe have gotten creative in how you're helping your kids as a family invest in the bigger story within your community or in the people that you are trying to plug into your kids' lives? Because there's these unique barriers that we're trying to navigate. So just because I know some of the things like, oh, these are a part of our rhythms, or how we brought people in our kids' lives, or how we were maybe trying to help them be part of that bigger story, like within our community. Well, some of those things have been shifted or taken away. How have you maybe found any great ways? And I know you guys live in a different city, but as a family, try to still continue helping them connect in those ways.
I knew you'd have a good question. I mean, honestly, I don't know that we've done it super well. The girls and I were talking the other day kind of about that same idea, and they just said that they're struggling because we used to just have a lot of people in our home. And so we just kind of started brainstorming, like, hey, how are ways that we can like take our home to these other places? So, right, one of my kids was like, well, we should start baking things for everybody. And one was like, well, we should write notes for everybody. So I don't know if there's a great way to do it right now, but I think if you can find some little ways to keep doing it and keep talking about it, then when we come out on the other side, I think we'll be better for it, right? That we decided that community was still worth fighting for. We decided our neighbors were still, worth loving. I mean, even little things like that we used to do at school, right? We can't do now. So over Christmas break, the kids and I, we like wrote notes to just like a bunch of random teachers, and just had them take them. Whereas normally we would, show up and serve them or help them. And so we just had to get a little creative with how we do it. I don't know if you have a good answer to that.
I do. I think you've done a great job. So we have a local, it's not even a ministry, it's just an organization that helps refugees in our community. And so Beth has been doing deliveries with that. And so they basically go pick up food and take them to 4 or 5 homes. And so in that, being able to, I think you would oftentimes take one of our kids or a couple of our kids on those. And so it kind of reinforced that value of like, hey, we're trying to care for others in the midst of this. I think talking about the things that we've lost or that we don't have in that, particularly about community. I think that's one of the things that has been exciting for us, is to hear our kids miss some of the things they had, in particular, their small groups, different things that they've had, with the church or in other areas. And then be able to just talk through that and be like, hey, see how important this is without it, see what we've, talking about what we've lost or missed in that as a way of reinforcing those values that we've already had. And so even if, there's not, again, it is a challenging season. So even if it's not obvious in that, talking about what's lost in that and what we're looking for, one of the questions I ask our kids on a regular basis or try to is, hey, what are you looking forward to? What's that thing? One, I'm trying to get to know, hey, where's their attention? Where's their heart? Where's their affection headed toward? And then 2, I'm also helping them look towards something else in the future. I'm trying to give them that perspective of hey, what's going. And so then sometimes that's a 2-minute conversation, and it's like, I'm looking forward to school tomorrow. Okay, great. And sometimes that's I'm looking forward to when we can just be back to normal again. So yeah.
Not sure that's a good answer.
That's great. Thanks, guys. Any other questions?
I'll ask one.
Definitely.
So we have kids who are a little bit older than yours in high school, but like through your experience, just with ministry with high schoolers, ideas on like how to get them more connected, especially if they're maybe pulling away or rebelling some. We've had a fairly big change in their lives where we moved from the West Coast back to Midwest, and so their life has been disrupted and kind of their community that they have is gone.
So let me repeat the question, make sure I've got it right. How do we deal with what feels like rebellion or gaining, like them moving towards independence? How do we navigate that as parents, and how do we help them get connected into a new community? So, Yep. So two things. One, again, this season's so much harder even with that. One, I would say the thing I tell parents all the time, as a student pastor, I tell parents all the time, look, your kids from middle school through high school are moving toward independence. They're moving from a relationship that you had with them that you got to dictate everything that happened to them and control their schedule, to one where they get eventually, depending on your kids, they're going to have their own ability to leave your house, without you. And so the thing I try and remind parents is ultimately that's a good thing, because if they're 30 and still in your house, you're not going to consider that a success. And so some days it's just remembering like, hey, this is part of independence. And so then and the other side of that is help them understand what you're trying to help them grow in. And so, hey, we want them to gain independence, but we also have rules in our house. What do those look like? And so the opportunities that you have to partner with them and what some of those rules are, like those are wins, because then they get to agree to, what those things are. And then two, help them also know what those values are. So the number one thing I tell parents that I had this conversation, I don't know, dozens of times. I hated it when my mom and dad made me go to church, and so I don't want to make my kids go to church, and I'm not saying you're not saying that, and what I would tell them is, where are you today? And they would answer, well, I'm in church. Okay. Seemed to work all right for you. And so what I would say is there's some things that I would just say like, hey, look, you can choose this when you move out one day, whether that's 18 or 20 or whatever, whatever it looks like, you can choose what you do. But one of the things that we have is, hey, you're going to find, a student ministry that you connect in. And so where is that going to look like? What does that look like? You guys can negotiate on some of those things. Helping them find that community is tricky. And so John, I'll say this, and you can tell me I'm wrong later. I would say like, hey, if they've got a friend that goes to another student ministry and they're connecting there, I would say, man, that's great. Like, hey, we're going to go here on Sundays, but if you connect over here on Wednesdays or Sunday nights or whatever, then man, we want you to get plugged in where you're finding faith, where you're connecting with other believers in that. That's a value for us. And so we're okay with that. Again, you got to figure out what that looks like in your family first, if that's okay. Cause for some families, that's not okay. But it's talking to them about the wins, about your hopes for them, releasing some of that, but maybe not all of that control, and then helping them understand the whys. Hey, we need you home by 10 o'clock, or we need you home by, 9:15 every night because of this, and let's talk about that. And just giving them real clear whys, even if they don't agree with you on what's effective there, where you can give them some freedom to say, hey, we want to accomplish this. We want to accomplish you keeping your room clean every day. What do you think is a good way for us to do that? Or, hey, we want you to gain an ability to manage your money better. How do we think that we should just give you $10 a week and you should earn the rest. What do you think that should look like? I'm just making that up off the top of my head, but I don't know if that helps at all or not, or if you'd add anything to that.
The only thing I would add that I've seen you tell a lot of parents that's worked is bring a friend, right?
Which they may not have some.
Right. If they don't, right. If they're still like trying to figure that out, but when they do find that friend, like, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to go to this thing at church. We're going to go to this event in the community. We're going to do whatever. Bring a friend. And I've just seen a lot of teenagers be like, okay with the situation all of a sudden, because they have somebody that's, they connect with and is like them. And so then they'll show up, right? And then God starts to move and other people invest in them and all of those things, because they decided to, show up and they weren't as.
Yeah. The other thing I would say is, as they move to teenagers, they still need you and they still want you in their life, even when they feel like even when it feels like they don't. They do keep pushing in. Just like when your toddler would get mad at you and throw a temper tantrum, and then 3 minutes later they would crawl up in your lap and pretend like nothing ever happened. Teenagers literally are the same way in a lot of ways, where they will push back on you and appropriately, again, maybe not right in that moment, but continue to lean into them. And even if it doesn't feel that way, they really, like, parents you still have that influence, they still want to have a relationship with you. They're just going through this new phase where they can't always figure out the words for it.
Great, thanks.
In there.
All right. That's super good, guys. Thanks. We're a little bit after 8. Man, we were pretty much right on time. This is amazing. This never happens
You're
in my
such
life.
a good DJ. I mean, host.
Just get me the turntables up here. I'll mix this thing. Is that what they say? I don't think so. Yeah. Well, thank you guys again. Thank you so much for your wisdom. Thank you for the questions and everything. You guys, I think we heard a lot of good stuff that we can take from this to be, 1, better disciples of Christ, and 2, better parents who parent our kids to know and love Jesus. So thank you so much, guys. Appreciate you.
Thanks for having
Thank
us.
you. Yeah.